Today, myself, Matthew Fox, will be talking with Paul Hoppy and Will Freeland about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Episode 5. All that and more after a commercial break we have no control over. Welcome back. I'm Matthew. I'm your host. I'm joined by Paul and Will. Paul, how are we doing today?
I'm good. I feel like I'm watching the show from the beginning again, and I'm very happy about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I got to the end of this episode. I was either like, Paul's either going to love this or hate this episode. So I'm glad it was that reaction. Fair. And Will, how are you feeling today?
I'm good, man. For the new character cameo or whatever, I definitely sat up and I was like, ooh, they brought that person in. But we'll talk about it. But yeah, it was a good time.
I was on record at the beginning of this saying, like, listen, I feel like WandaVision taught us a very stern lesson about, like, don't buy into theory, don't buy into the Mephisto of it all, just watch what's on screen. Mm-hmm. And so I paid as little attention as I could to all these rumors and stories about the new person who were, going to get revealed. Yeah. And frankly, having done that and cared so little, the fact that it wound up being like, yeah, it's a pretty big actress and apparently a role that matters a lot, but it was on screen for maybe 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And then just seeing a whole bunch of fans getting very upset. Like, no, we were promised something big. This is not enough. No. I was so happy. Just don't go that way, folks. Just don't do it.
The troll of it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
I find it unclear how much this is like Marvel leaking stuff and how much of it is sort of media just trying to generate clicks. But yeah. I'm super uninterested in all of it. And I was like, Elaine! But like...
certainly when I've read more about the whole thing with Paul Bettany, like, in theory, teasing some big reveal, it looks like in the greater context of that interview, he was being pretty clear that he was kind of being facetious and that he was probably talking about something like appearing with himself, and then it just kind of got taken and run with. But
wait,
who knows?
Something was taken out of context?
I know, in fandom media, no less.
Wow.
You're crazy.
Outrageous.
You're crazy.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to dive into from this last episode, but I want to start actually by getting into one thing from the episode a week before, episode 4, because we had a fan write in and raised a really interesting question that I did some more digging into and found a lot of people talking about. And I've seen some people posting about it online, so I wanted to, it's one very dear to my heart, so I wanted to read her question and sort of give my thoughts on it, but then would love to hear from you two as well. And the fan's name's AB, and they write in, I've been listening to your superhero ethics podcast for a while and really enjoy it. Thank you, as always. I'm also disabled and an ambulatory wheelchair and cane user, so I really appreciate when you bring in your own experiences as a disabled person to talk about ethics in the MCU generally. For this reason, I was really surprised when the scene in episode 4 where Io removed Bucky's prosthetic was treated so lightheartedly in your recent episode. I personally found the scene very upsetting and was reminded of times when people had pushed my cart, pushed my chair, or moved my cane away without asking me. There's really a wide response to the scene on social media, and some discussion about the situations in which it can be permissible to infringe on someone else's bodily autonomy, which could be an interesting ethical issue to talk about, as well in the lights of the means versus ends conversations that have been going on. And I think that's definitely a good point. Like I said, I really love your show and keep up the good work, but there's something you have time space to address in a future episode I'd love to hear taken more seriously or with a disability lens. So, and then Avi and I emailed back and forth a bit about this, and they shared some really interesting links that I'll be sharing as well. Because I hadn't been seeing it on my own thread, but I looked more into this, and it's definitely something where there's a lot of discussion on the one hand from disabled folks like myself, who some folks are talking about how it was a very upsetting scene and really bothered them, and then a lot of discussion about the the dynamics between a white man and a Wakandan woman, and all the power dynamics there, and the idea of, like, the arm being Wakandan, and was it a betrayal, and all this kind of stuff. And I think there's a whole lot of other stuff there that we can get into, but I wanted just to focus on the disability thing. And I think that AB raises a very good point here. And I was thinking for a while about why I missed this entirely, because I'm actually an amputee. As I think I've mentioned here before. In my case, it's my leg, not an arm, but normally I identify very strongly with, I want to identify very strongly with disabled characters. And I was trying to think about, like, it honestly had never occurred to me when we were talking about that episode last time. And I think the part of this is why, that I think it is partially because and this is something I've talked about before in this podcast, I'm often very frustrated with how disabled characters are presented in superhero and fantasy and sci-fi media, especially where the kind of story where, like, we're told a person has a disability, but very quickly they heal the disability with either magic or tech or whatever it is. And even if it's not healed, like, for all intents and purposes, they don't have a disability. And it makes that person hard to relate to. And I was realizing that, for me at least, and I don't in any way want to discount anyone else's experience, this is just kind of giving my thoughts on it, I've never thought of Bucky as a disabled character. Mm-hmm. Like, I intellectually understand he doesn't have an arm, but unless I'm misremembering something, we've never on screen seen him having a moment where his amputation affects him in some negative way, or just like changes the way he interacts with the world. There's never been a moment where I've seen him do something on screen and I'm like, oh yeah, I relate to that. I know what that feeling is like. And granted, arm and leg's not the same, but like there's a couple of disability TikTokers I follow who have prosthetic arms, and their stuff I relate to all the time. And so for me, like, I don't think it's, again, it doesn't discount other people's reactions to it. It's one I want to sit with more. But for me, it mostly got me thinking about how I feel like I have never really thought of Bucky as a disabled character. Clearly he is, but because they've just never made it a part of his story. They've never shown him dealing with a world without an arm, or dealing with, you know, the problems that come up with having a prosthetic or anything like that. So that's just kind of my first take on it, but want to kind of throw it out to you all and see what you thought of that critique of that scene and your opinions overall.
I feel pretty strongly that Bucky has been presented with the, you know, I'd say all too common trope that I hadn't really thought about until, you know, we talked about it in the past, or since, you know, you brought it up, but that he's kind of another case of disability as superpower. Right. Where, right, he has one arm, not two, but then he has this mechanical arm that's like one of his superpowers. And so they kind of play it like, you know, like he's an enhanced person, right?
Yeah.
And they never, you know, they could have like a scene of him like taking a shower. Like, if, I don't know, does he have to take it off? Like, is it waterproof? Like, if he has to take it off and do things that way, like, I feel like that would communicate like his actual disability in a way that when he's got this metal arm on it, which is like made of vibranium now, right?
Right.
I'm sure plenty of other people would appreciate a Bucky shower scene anyway.
Very true. Very true.
But like, yeah, I do feel like I can understand how it, you know, how some things hit people in a way that other people just totally miss, right? But I definitely feel where you're coming from, where they haven't portrayed, like with Coulson, I think, in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., right? Like, he loses a hand, and then he has like a magic super technology hand. And that plays like a superpower kind of the same way too. And
the positive example I think we've seen in the MCU is Misty Knight, where in the Iron Fist series, Misty Knight loses her arm, and she goes through some trauma about it, and it is clearly like something that's affecting her. And then when she gets the prosthetic, which Stark built, the Fist Company did not build, I will die on that hill. But like, when Misty Knight gets her arm, like, she has trouble adjusting to it, and she goes through the kind of things that, for me, and I think for a lot of people who've had a prosthetic, like, it doesn't fit perfectly. It takes some adjustment. It's not quite the same muscle group. So I definitely hear what you're saying, and I think that's, looking at Misty Knight is kind of a different example of a better way of showing, like, yeah, this character is disabled, and we should interact with that.
Yeah, and they really took their time with that, as opposed to here it's sort of, you know, we see Bucky, like Tony rips his arm off or something, right? The prosthetic.
Right. And
then Bucky's like defeated, but he's not defeated because of that. Like, he got knocked out by Iron Man, basically, right?
Yeah.
And then, you know, then we see him in Wakanda with, you know, without the arm, but then like the next time he's like spending any significant time on screen, it's like, okay, here's your new arm, you know?
Right.
So yeah.
Okay, so I can only speculate because I am not an amputee. So I'm speaking from a very outsider's perspective, and I don't know anyone personally that is an amputee, at least that I spend any amount of time with.
I was like, you know, Yeah, we haven't met in person. That's totally fine.
And also I did. You've mentioned it in passing, Matt, but I didn't know exactly what your amputation was.
Yeah, I don't think I've gone into it before.
Yeah, and I've only listened to maybe like a total of like 5 of your guys' podcasts. So I'm not a true hardcore fan like some of the other people. So in specifically with Bucky, and then I'll kind of expand beyond just him. But Bucky, I don't even think has lived his life as an amputee. Like, he's never really, with the exception of his time in Wakanda, he hasn't really had any time out and about as an amputee. He's always had an arm. Like, he gets blasted off the train, and by the time he wakes up, the Soviets have given him an arm as a replacement. So, like, sure, at some point in his canon, there is some getting used to a different arm and using different kinds of muscles, but 1, that happens off screen, but then 2, from our perspective, he's always had an arm,
right?
Like, he's never spent any time, because he's always been under ice or cryo frozen in the times that you would expect him to have this like learning curve of having this arm. So I totally get it. And this is where what I'm about to say is where my ignorance of life as an amputee comes into play. But there's a part of me that wonders if it is different when your amputee affects your mobility, like losing your foot or losing a leg versus losing a hand or an arm. Right. I think there are stories you can tell as far as losing a limb in general, but I think there's more on-screen visual storytelling you can do if they're stuck in a wheelchair otherwise.
I think that's very true. And I think, you definitely still are an amputee if you have a prosthetic.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the right now we don't live in a world of perfect technology. Right. And I think most prosthetics don't completely replicate the effects of having that actual limb. And frankly, if you want anything beyond the very basic, insurance probably doesn't cover it. So, let alone, a vibranium arm, I don't think Blue Cross and Blue Shield is ever going to pay for.
No.
And I think there are some differences between different kinds of amputations, like you said, Will. I think both of them can still be very life affecting, to be sure, and very difficult. But I think you're both right, that I feel like both we on screen, as well as from what we know, the character of Bucky has never really gone through. Sure, he has gone through a lot, but at least for me, I've never really related to him in that way. And again, it's not to say that anyone's wrong to do so. And I think I'm really glad that this point got brought up. And I think when we do a larger episode, maybe on the ethics of the whole show, but maybe we're going to do something on something else about bodily autonomy at some later point. Because Paul, you and I have talked a lot about, we might be okay with regulating weapons, but what do you do when your body's a weapon? How do you regulate someone who reads minds? And when you're prosthetic, which is just a basic, if you're walking to a room and everyone's please check your weapons at the door, on the one hand, your prosthetic is a literal weapon. On the other hand, asking a person to check their arm at the door is a huge violation of bodily autonomy. So
yeah,
it's like Lord of the Rings. You would rob an old man of his walking stick.
Yeah.
Sorry to make light, but
no. Now I'm envisioning Yoda having his lightsaber and his cane.
I was going to say Gandalf's always making light with the stick. So
yeah. I will also say that before 9/11, I would go up to when airport security was a lot lighter. Obviously, I used to joke that I could smuggle cocaine into my wheelchair and no one would ever know. Because I'd go towards the security thing, they'd see me in a wheelchair and go, "Oh, he's in a wheelchair. Just go right ahead."
Right.
I was always like, I can take advantage of this.
Yeah.
I'm now being horribly offensive. This is just my perspective on disability, to be clear. But yeah, anyway, so AB, thank you so much for raising that. I know we're not really quite getting into the meat of the issue you raised originally about bodily autonomy. But although if you two have any comment to that, please go ahead. I think that's one that I would love for us to get into more at a later date. but I just wanted to kind of talk about why, for me at least, I never even thought of that, and I'm really glad you pointed it out because it helped me see like, oh, this is something I've been missing. That's a really good point because I can definitely see why it's so upsetting for someone, and I can also understand why, from the Wakandan perspective, you're in that fight now, and like you need to win the fight, but it's a hard issue to be sure.
Yeah,
I feel like we could do a whole. No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as far as seeing someone struggle with losing a limb and it being part of their like arc and seeing that struggle happen, Yo-Yo from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. goes through that.
Spoilers!
No, okay.
I know I already said spoilers from earlier seasons. I didn't finish S.H.I.E.L.D.
Well, okay. It also happens to her in the comics, so I expected it to happen in the show. But
okay, fair.
It is absolutely not that like Marvel is like, okay, cool, we checked that box, we don't have to do it again. But we do see that struggle and that trauma more so than we saw with Misty losing her arm in Daredevil. Spoilers, but if you include Netflix and you include
spoilers.
Agents and Agent Carter, there's like 4 examples of amputees, and the one you see go through the most on screen is definitely Yo-Yo.
Yeah, I think that's right. And her story was another one that I definitely connected with a lot in that way. I will say, though, you said Misty Knight is from Daredevil. She is one of the only things that is Daredevil quality in Iron Fist, but she's actually from Iron Fist.
Sorry, yeah, she is
and
in
Luke
Iron
Cage
Fist. Oh my
first.
gosh, I'm so
and
sorry.
Luke Cage, yeah, actually Luke Cage.
And the Defenders. So
and Defenders.
You know,
She's okay. The Netflix
you think of it as the Daredevil verse, right?
Her losing her arm plot is in Iron Fist too.
Yes, it
but yeah,
is.
she's been.
Oh my
not
gosh.
Quite...
I'm so bad.
No,
it's because you know why? You know why?
No,
it's because Misty Knight is such a good character that I assume anything good from the Netflix Marvel is in Daredevil.
Yeah.
Or Jessica Jones.
Yeah. No, it's so true. It's so true. Luke Cage too is also my favorites, but yeah.
Luke Cage was great. I love Luke Cage's soundtrack, but
it was a very, very good 10-episode show told over 13 episodes.
Yeah. It's just they made him such a big deal and such an icon that after the first season, it really drove home that Netflix was not going to be part of the MCU.
Yeah.
There's no way that Method Man makes a song about you and no one outside of Harlem knows who you are.
Right, especially when like we know that Peter Parker is specifically like a New York City based. Granted, it's Queens based, but like in this day and age of social media, like it's all kind of one. It's always been, but especially now, it was one city. Like, and Tony Stark's there. And anyway, back to Falcon and Winter Soldier.
What I was gonna say was, I feel like we could do a whole episode on this one thing, which I think my point has been proved.
Yeah. No, and I think, and that's why I'm so glad AB brought it up, because I think I'm happy to commit to. Let's make sure we do an episode about bodily autonomy and the way it's treated, and disability can be a big part of that.
Yeah, I should also, I guess, to AB's point, apologize for making light of it, because it is a very sensitive topic, and it's one of the things that I just have zero frame of reference for, and I didn't give it the delicacy that it needed.
I get that, and I appreciate you saying that, and I All right, so anyway, we'll definitely, again, thank you so much, AB, for raising that. We're going to dive more into it at a later point. But let's get to this episode of Falcon and Winter Soldier. Just first, kind of overall thoughts. What'd you all think of this episode?
I loved it.
Yeah. I had a great time.
Yeah. Paul, what'd you like? I know you've been kind of on the fence about the last couple episodes.
I mean, I don't know if I describe my position as on the fence, but just not. I don't mean that as a correction. I mean that as like an accentuation in terms of like. I found the last 2 episodes very frustrating because I loved the first 2 episodes so much. There was a certain kind of pacing. There was a thoughtfulness and sort of a depth I felt to how we were dealing with certain issues. And then the 3rd and the 4th were kind of, to me, it felt like, all right, let's have some fun, and like, we're not going to totally shelve the issues that we're talking about, but we're going to kind of like just kind of hit the notes and like aim for some plot points. And honestly, this episode felt like season 2 of Iron Fist to me, where, I mean, okay, episodes 3 and 4 weren't like season 1 of Iron Fist, but the point being that, you know, I was like disappointed, and I felt like season 1 of Iron Fist didn't give the writers of season 2 much to work with, really. Mm-hmm. And then the writers of season 2 were like, yeah, no, it's okay, we got this. And like, then they kind of made something sort of out of nothing, although, you know, Misty Knight had come over from the other series, right, as we discussed.
Falcon.
But here, it's like, I feel like episodes 3 and 4 had a lot of stuff that just really didn't make much sense to me, in terms of, in some spots, character motivation, in other spots, just in terms of, you know, some kind of the mechanics of the plot. But this episode, for me, it felt a little bit like a clean start, right? Where it was like, first of all, the episode had to begin with Sam and Bucky squaring off with John, because if they were just like, oh, I guess he did that, that sucks, like, I just done. I would have just been done with the show, you know?
Yeah.
And like, them being like, no, you need to put down the shield, was really like exactly how the episode had to start for me. And then from there, kind of just like dialing it back and being like, okay, now we're going to go back to a little bit slower storytelling, set up what's probably going to be a very intense final episode, which is cool. You know, that's going to be your climax. Fine. But it felt to me like they kind of only barely touched on Carly and what she's doing, but like within the context of where she is now, that makes sense to me. I actually thought the way they handled Walker was really great. I have a ton to say about that. And just the whole, like, you know, Sam going home to this like real community and having, you know, getting everybody to help, because like his parents has already always helped everybody. And, you know, there's like a lot of love in the community, and then Bucky showing up and just kind of being like, you know, I'll help you with, you know, with what you need, kind of, you know, whatever, you know, whatever it is. And, you know, then their moments together, it was just a most excellent episode. Not to mention the whole, Isaiah, getting more of that, you know, the story there.
Definitely.
Also was very powerful. So yeah, it just felt like, you know, at the beginning of the show, I was like, I'm either going to love this show or hate it. And like, maybe both. I don't know. It's like, you know, like, just because like the parts that bother me so much because of how much I love the rest of it. And now I feel like we're getting back to that. We're clearly going to see Yori in the last episode. You know, Bucky's going to go try and make amends. And, yeah, it's like, I feel like, okay, they're actually giving me what I wanted. So, you know, we had our Zemo adventure, and now we're back to this, and I'm good.
Yeah. Will, what about you? What was your thoughts on this first episode?
Fifth episode.
Fifth episode.
Well, Will, what about you? What were your thoughts on this episode?
I really liked it. So I've been nervous about, and we talked about it last week, of just like only having 6 episodes, and the first 2 and the second 2 being so like different in tone and storytelling. How, you know, what are 5 and 6 going to be like? And if 5 is an indication of how 6 is going to be, I appreciate that it felt like they're coming back full circle, going back and touching on Sam's personal life and kind of they do a lot of unspoken character growth, which I appreciate, because then it kind of it demands that you actually pay attention to the show. It's not something you can just have in the background.
Right.
There's a lot of storytelling going on in the facial expressions and how they interact and how they hold things, like and we'll talk more, but like when at the beginning when Sam is walking away with the shield, he doesn't wear the shield. He holds it down. He grabs a handle and just lets it hang, like, because he still doesn't. It's not his shield at that moment, and seeing little things like that, just the storytelling is just so great. And so I had a great time just like pulling in every little detail I could, just watching that. But yeah, the Walker trial was wild. I thought he was going to break the podium, but he didn't.
Yeah, we I think all have a lot to say about Walker, and we're going to get to that for sure. And I think I'm kind of halfway in between, Paul, of what you're saying, because I definitely loved episodes 1 and 2. I think I liked episodes 3 and 4 a lot more than you did.
Yeah,
I definitely felt like they were very different, and I like what you said about the description of they were like, okay, let's stop with that stuff and just have some fun. The thing is, I thought it was so much fun that I kind of didn't care.
Fair.
And then also in episode 4, I did think they raised another great set of very ethical issues to talk about, which is the only thing I look for in these shows, but obviously this podcast especially, it's kind of one of the lenses I bring. And I think my general feeling was, okay, that was a great episode. I'm just not sure how episodes 3 and 4 are the same TV show as episodes 1 and 2. And I think I definitely had some of the same concerns of they're setting up these two great different storylines. I am worried that they're not going to be able to pull it all back together. And I feel like this made me have a lot more hope for that, because obviously the Walker story isn't over, but they did kind of bring it to at least like the end of a chapter in a very satisfying, if not clear way, which we'll get into. And then, like I said, being able to go back to Sam, and this was clearly much more the Sam episode, but being able to very clearly like reference what Bucky is going to go through, and that, like, we're getting back to that story. Yeah, I am now. I was very nervous about 5 and 6. I'm now. There's always a like, oh my god, it's going to take 4 hours to wrap this up. How are they all going to do it in 1 hour? Kind of feeling, but I'm at least feeling a lot more optimistic about episode 6. So I think in many ways, like, Sam is definitely like the protagonist of this episode in some ways. Like, it's his journey we go through more than anything. And it seems like he's, the main thing he's wrestling with is what does it mean for him to be Captain America. And as you said, Will, this time the first time they really kind of explicitly name it, like, as a black man, you know, and the twin legacies he gets from, like, Isaiah, and Isaiah specifically saying him, like, no black man would want to pick up the shield, and the stuff that he's getting, about, like, why he would want it. And now that he knows even more that, like, Bucky wasn't surprised that Bucky knew Steve was planning to do this. What's kind of your take on the things that he goes through in terms of, like, trying to make that decision and where he stands with this idea of being a black Captain America, if that's the things that make sense?
I think, and this is how I feel about, like, life in general, especially being a black man in America. But, like, it really depends on. It sucks because when you have the title of Captain America, it's very much you're going to represent something different to every single person. Yeah. And that it then kind of becomes important for the individual to decide what part of America are they representing. It sucks that it's under the title of America, but, like, Steve personified the golden dream of what the ideal American is as far as, like, morals and what you stand for and all that kind of stuff. But as we get into the 21st century, that is not the America that we live in anymore. And so, Isaiah's perception or perspective of what America is for the black man is very true, but there are also other aspects of America that you could spend your time focusing on instead. And I think Sam is while acknowledging the bad, I think he's going to be trying to stand for the potential of the black man in America. Like, I was almost sad that they didn't say, well, we have a black president. Right? Because, like, 20 years ago, there was no way that no one was convinced that we'd ever have a black president. And then, so it's like, once we have that, and oh, geez, I think it's Chris Rock had a bit about this. Just like, now that we have a black president, you no longer have to lie to your kid that you could be anything. Like,
oh god, that's a powerful thing.
and so it's just like, yeah, like, you can be a black Captain America because quote unquote, all it takes is you being willing to fight the closed-minded racist part of America and stand up against it. And when you spend 30 years in jail being experimented on, torn apart, I can totally see how you would be convinced that that's not going to happen, and it's not worth the fight. Sam's story is so different. He's led a different life than Isaiah, and I think there is an avenue for Sam to fight for his dream and his values, but still acknowledge what people like Isaiah have been through.
Yeah, and I remember I said early on, I think after episode 1, where we had just met Isaiah, that I felt like it was going to be important in some ways for Isaiah to like give his blessing for Sam to become Captain America. And I think this obviously went in a very different way. But I think to me it still hit kind of the same idea of that to some extent Sam couldn't become Captain America without really coming face to face with that legacy or without wrestling with it. Being able to say like, yeah, maybe I can have a hope that Isaiah couldn't have, but I can't do that without fully acknowledging and living with the reality of Isaiah.
Yeah, when he goes, at first I thought he was going to kind of like try to kind of get permission from Isaiah almost, you know, like sort of to get his blessing to be Captain America. I also thought maybe he was just going to give him the shield and be like, hey, I'm going to leave this here with you. You know, you deserve it. Nobody ever needs to know, you know. But like in my eyes, you know, you were Captain America every bit as much as Steve was.
Right.
But then it becomes clear, I think, that, you know, he's like, I need to understand. And Isaiah's like, you do understand. But Sam's like, you know, Sam understands, you know, racism. He understands institutional racism and people's individual biases. He understands what it's like to be a black man in the South in like the 1980s, 90s, you know, to this century. But like, he doesn't know what it was like in 1950. He doesn't know what it's like to spend 30 years in prison while the love of your life dies outside of prison and you never even get to talk to her again. Like, and I mean, that's unfortunately an experience that way too many people have in the real world. I mean, with, you know, the mass incarceration and particularly of black people, but, you know, that Sam needed to, I think, understand from Isaiah's point, like what happened, you know, and how did it feel, and I think he then concludes like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't do this. Like, he's still conflicted, I think, and you know, I mean, at the beginning of the episode, you know, Bucky kind of reinforces Steve's vote of confidence, where you know they take the shield from Walker. And Bucky picks it up, and it's like, for a second, it's like, I think you can kind of see, like, on some level, he's like, I could be Captain America. And then he drops the shield by Steve. Like, this is yours.
By Sam.
You know?
Yeah.
And, yeah, by Sam. Yeah, not by John. Although I was a little worried, I was like, please don't have John, like, get up and take it again. Like, I think this fight scene was great, but it was, like, plenty long. But then I feel like it was Sarah, right, saying to Sam, like, hey, just because one person sees it this way, like, he can't tell you who you are, he can't tell you who you can be. And, you know, you have to decide that. And so I do feel like in this episode, Sam made the decision, you know, I'm going to be Captain America because I want to try and fight for what America says it is, what America supposedly wants to be, but very much isn't, right? But that doesn't mean that there aren't also the good things, and that it can't be something better, and that he can have a you know, a place in that, a big role in that, like as a symbol.
I think that's really well put. And I really like a lot of both you were saying. And one thing I just want to say at the beginning of this is, Will, you said before about how you're not a disabled person in that way. You don't have an amputation, and so you're not sure kind of where you stand on this. For me as a white person, like hearing what you're talking about, I have that exact same feeling. You know, that I'm really glad you can share that experience. It's obviously when I don't, but what I like about the show is that it's kind of opening that up for others to kind of see and understand. And one thing that I got out of it especially was, and this kind of going to what you're both saying about like that Sam can have a hope, the level of surprise that Sam has about just how awful what happened to Isaiah is. On one level, it's kind of naivete, but also it's kind of what you're saying about how Sam hasn't gone through that. He can imagine a possibility that for Isaiah is not in the realm of possibility. And I think that that's kind of an interesting show of like the difference between the two of them. It also now makes me even more excited for Young Avengers that we get, just because when we get Eli's story, Isaiah has to be a part of it in some way, and I really want to see like what's Isaiah's reaction when Eli becomes a hero of some kind. But the other thing it also brought up for me, and I hadn't even thought of this until this moment, is I think we get this wonderful parallel of later in the story, Sam gives Bucky this great speech about how like, apologizing can't just be for your own ego and to make you feel better. Apologizing has to be about, can you bring catharsis and closure to someone else? And I wonder if that actually is part of why he's going into, meet with Isaiah, because like while he's talking to Isaiah, he's like, let's tell someone, let's get some justice. He wants to do that like Bucky thing of like, let's fix this. And I think he has to realize like, it can't be fixed for Isaiah. Like even it would put Isaiah in terrible danger. He doesn't want to do that. But also the sense at least I get is Isaiah doesn't think that would matter. Like to punish people now for what happened 40 years ago. It's not going to give him those 30 years back. It's not going to give him the love of his life back. And again, it's so subtle, but I feel like part of what Sam learns in that scene informs what he then says to Bucky later in the episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is where if this had happened in the comics, these scenes, there would definitely be some internal monologue from Sam saying that exact same thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Here, like you said, we're watching it with facial expressions, but in the comics, you could do it.
Yeah. Right, yeah. There's so much conveyed, by the actors through facial expressions in this. Obviously, in comic books, you don't have motion, so it's a little harder to portray emotion, but not impossible, of course. But
right.
The monologuing, that just makes me think like, what would this show be like if it had like an internal monologue like throughout the whole show? Yeah. That would be like a fun like fan cast thing. Like like make episodes where like each episode has a different character's internal monologue. Of course, episode 3 would be Zemo, or maybe episode 4. But this one would be Sam, and I think this episode also does something that I always find very important whenever a show or any work of fiction is trying to kind of portray the experience of like a group of people. Is to show that not everybody who you think of as being in a group of people has the same experience or the same perspective.
Yeah. And,
it's not just like, a lot of times when you see people writing about politics, it's like, oh, well, the black vote tends to go this way and Latino vote this way. And, like, uncollege educated white men vote this way. Like, and it's like these things are all obviously like super simplifications, but often, you'll have like that's one of the things when you have like a token character, it's like, then it's like there's this idea that they speak for everybody who, for all black people or all amputees or all vegans or whatever, like, not to necessarily compare my experience with anyone else's.
But all people who want to tear down all borders and have an international world, for example.
Exactly. I think this show could benefit from having a little wider range of perspectives on anarchism and anti-nationalism. But I think this episode really does a brilliant job of showing, like, a lot of black characters having different reactions to what's going on. I mean, there's Lamar's parents too, I mean, that scene was so heartbreaking, and, their son is off fighting at John Walker's side, thinking it's like such an honor, clearly believing in the idea of America, right? Clearly believing that like the GRC is doing the right thing, that the US is doing the right thing, that the army is doing the right thing. And, you know, it's just there's so many different perspectives within any one, you know, group that, you know, that we make groups, and that's the reason we should have no borders or nations, but or a reason. But like, just I don't know, I just really appreciate that the show wasn't like, this is the black perspective, you know. It's like, here's a character, here's a character, here's a character, here's a character. Each character has their own perspective, and it's nuanced, and it's believable, and it feels like people, and describing their experiences and having their viewpoints. And I don't know, I just want more of that all the time.
Yeah.
No, I think it's so true. And Paul, especially I like what you're saying there about the American government, because I feel like one of the things that we've all talked about it as an ethical thing, and I think this episode is where they really kind of made it official, is this idea of like, does the Shield, does Captain America stand for the actual United States of America anymore? And, you know, I mean, we'll get into Walker's story in a minute, but to me, some of the most evil, like, on the one hand, I wanted to see Walker get punished for committing murder. On the other hand, the people who are doing it, the council, whoever the heck they are clearly not great people and clearly have no idea what Captain America is supposed to stand for. It seemed like they're much more interested in the public relations of it all. And so I felt like on the one hand, we're getting this like clear thing of like, this isn't about being an American. This isn't about fighting for America. It's about these ideals that people associate with America, or at least did 70 years ago with Steve Rogers. And so to me, it's also why, like, that last moment of the episode where Sam opens the box, I think the general consensus is, and yeah, what's in the box? To me, the general consensus is that it is going to be some degree of like a new version of Wings and like his Captain America / Falcon suit, whatever that is. And I'm hoping that it in some way does, like, it's not just Wings, that it actually incorporates the symbolism of Captain America in some way. Because for me, given all we've had about it being like the American government no longer should have any role in saying who is or who isn't Captain America, for it to be Wakandans to decide that, to kind of give their blessing to Sam being Captain America, both because of like the African connection, but even more just the idea of like, you know, Wakanda now playing this international role in the world. You know, the Dora Milaje has jurisdiction where the Dora Milaje are. Like, that'd be a horrible statement from anyone except the Dora Milaje, because we love them. But like, this idea of Wakanda now playing a much more internationalist, like, we're going to get involved when we see problems, for them to sort of say, like, you know, we gave the material for the first Captain America shield. We still kind of have ownership of that. We think that you are worthy. To me, like, I don't know if that's where it's going to go, but if it does, it to me would be such a perfect way of tying up all the things we're talking about here.
For sure. I just really wanted quickly to say that I think some people do know what's in the box, because I think there's like a toy out there somewhere. So don't look at any toys if you want to not know what's in the box. I'm probably just not going to even go on, you know, any social media for a week, because I actually want that to be an experience in the show. And Will, if you know, please don't tell us.
I do not. Well, I know what the comic book Captain America Sam Wilson looks like.
Yeah, I think it's super powerful that both as like a symbol of internationalism, basically, that, you know, Wakanda's like, here's your Captain America suit. It's made in Africa, you know, like, I mean, you know, if he has that and the shield, it's like, you know, it kind of underscores like the African American, you know, like nature of the character at that point, in I think a really kind of beautiful way. And the idea of it not just being the U.S. government who gets to decide this, and also they really were very specific to be like, this episode we're going to mention the shield doesn't really necessarily belong to the U.S. government. It's kind of a legal gray area. It probably came from a different timeline. So, you know, I mean, we don't know.
Also true. That's a whole set of legal jurisdiction that hasn't been covered yet.
Exactly.
Yeah, the one last thing I wanted to say about Sam also, and this I'm going to give credit to, there's a TikTok creator who I really like. He does great things. He's called Freddy's Roommate. Definitely check him out. And he made a comment about how Sam's true superpower is communication. And I loved that, because I thought, the way he is able to get through to Bucky and Like, I thought the therapist did the best job they could with where Bucky was, but, like, Sam's basically the best therapist Bucky's had, and has, like, Bucky will talk about the nightmares to Sam, the way he wouldn't to his therapist, and the way he frames that, like, you can't just apologize, you have to, like, bring closure to those who need it. It just felt like Sam was just, like, and Sam was able to talk to Carly, like, I like the idea that that's Sam's superpowers, that he can reach people.
So, to be a complete nerd,
go for it.
Mentioning that is kind of a fun, weird twist callback to Falcon's, because Falcon in the comics has a superpower. He can telepathically communicate with birds. It's really weird and really random, and he almost never uses it. But him being able to see and communicate with birds, and then saying that his superpower in the MCU is to be able to communicate, it's just nice.
That's awesome. So let's talk about John Walker, because we got one heck of an ethical journey with him as well. I have a lot to say about him, but I've been talking a lot about my theories to start our conversations. Let me just start with you two. What do y'all think about the ethical issues surrounding Mr. Walker this episode?
Okay, so the opening scene where he goes and fights Bucky and Sam. So okay, he comes down from his high or his blind rage of killing the guy, but I thought Carly killed Lamar, by the way.
Okay,
cool.
He was clearly lying about that. And
yes. Okay.
He seems to think he knows that. Yeah.
Okay. So, coming down from that blind rage and him actually mourning Lamar, I was like, okay, like at least he still has like a heart, for lack of a better term. But then he is able to go private into a private area and go all out fight with Bucky and Sam. That fight, Paul mentioned it a minute ago, it was too long, but what's his face? John clearly was trying to kill both of them in the exact same way that he killed the Flag Smasher. And that whole scene and the little exchanges here and there, just like, oh, I see what you're trying to do. That just drove home, like, John's idea of Captain America and the Shield is very not okay. It's very skewed. He has demented the idea, what he has put on the pedestal, what I imagine all good army boys in the MCU look up to. He has changed it. It is warped in his mind to a point of clear no return.
Yeah.
He's willing to kill anything and anyone that gets in the way of Captain America achieving his goal.
There's a moment when he's kind of on his knees in the abandoned factory or wherever it is that they find him. And you can see that he's feeling guilt, and you can see that he's feeling upset, and you can see that he's like questioning himself. And when they walk in, I literally thought to myself, like, this is his like make or break moment. This is either the moment where he's like, guys, I don't deserve the shield, and he can find his way to some sort of redemption, or he's just like, nope, I made a heel turn and I'm walking on my heels. And yeah, I think you're right. That's like, that was the moment where he's like, nope, this is who I am now.
Yeah. Also though, kudos to him. Okay, so I've been in situations like his his trial, where you have people of authority that are above you just berating you and telling you how bad you are. And I have had moments where I've almost lost my cool, but he also had the mental clarity to point out, you made me.
Yeah.
You built me this way. How dare you take this away from me? That was my one, like, to him on that. That was, I was like, okay, John, I see you.
Yeah, I really liked Walker in this episode. Not like, oh, that guy should be Captain America. But, like, I think the fact that he was a good match for Sam and Bucky actually makes a lot of sense. Like, he should be stronger and a better fighter than Steve was, I think. Because, like, he was in peak physical condition and then got the serum. As opposed to Steve, who was, like, 95 pounds and then got the serum. And so I thought that was a good fight scene. You know, I think it made sense. I think they made it a little extra long, probably because the rest of the episode wasn't going to have that much action, just like the, you know, episode 1, where they're like, yeah, we'll open with a huge set piece. And, you know, but the moment, like, it felt like he had this big conflict. He had guilt. The guilt was more over letting Lamar die, I think, than killing the guy, right?
Yeah.
But I think on some level, you know, on some level, like, he knew he fucked up, right? But it wasn't until Sam mentions the shield that he's like, oh, that's what this is about. Even though on some level he knows that's not really what it's about, but it's like, that's like his insecurities kind of like coming to the surface and kind of like taking control. And he's just like, all right, well, I'm just going to kill both of you now because, you know, you're trying to take Captain America from me and it's me now. And, you know, the trial, I thought, like, yeah, he should get suspended. He should get prosecuted for murder, you know, like in Riga, right? But, like, him losing the mantle, like, on some level, it changes nothing. Like, and this is the thing when somebody who's put in a position of power by an institution abuses that power, that individual is sometimes held responsible. Too often they're not, of course. But even when that individual is held responsible, the institution is so rarely held responsible.
Right.
The institution endures, right? Like, the GRC seems to take zero responsibility. They're like, oh, it's going to be an international incident. It's like, yeah, but they're still holding their meetings. They're still voting on deporting 20 million people using military force.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they gave him the shield, they put him in the field, and they called him Captain America. They need to be held accountable for what they've done, and organizations are just so rarely held accountable.
Mm-hmm. And to me, like, I think it's something on the minds of everybody watching this, but for me especially, like, I'm in Minneapolis. I live not far from Brooklyn Center. Last night I could open my windows and get the lovely scent of tear gas that's being fired by police into the crowds.
Wow.
I think last night it was pepper spray, not tear gas. And granted, all that's happening more recently, but obviously the theme of, like, cops or military, like, doing things they shouldn't do and harming almost always brown or black people and then getting away with it. As you said, the institutions not getting punished are a theme that's been with us all the time. And I felt like they did such a good job of, without, like, lampshading it, but of drawing that connection with Walker for all the stuff we're talking about there. Because first of all, he says a couple of things of, like, why are you making me do this? And, like, that guy made him do it, which is the same as, like, you know, like, if only he hadn't resisted, you know, I mean, like, you could hear him say that exact line of, like, if only that Flag Smasher hadn't resisted, he wouldn't have had this happen. But also that line that you pointed out, Paul, of where he's kind of okay with things until they mention the shield, and he just snaps to this incredibly defensive place, you know?
Yeah.
And again, I'm projecting like crazy here because I'm watching story. You know, I was at a protest a couple nights ago where things were pretty calm until people started chanting about the police, and you could see the police already in riot gear and holding automatic weapons in front of us, like, visibly change their demeanor because we were naming the fact that, like, the police were the killers here. And so to watch him go through that of, like, oh, you're now questioning who I am. You want to take the shield from me. It just, you know, he's kind of in this middle ground of being a cop or a military. And right now the media is mostly talking about cops. We've certainly had this trouble with the media as well. And it just, like, the ways in which what Walker's going through is such a mirror for that problem in our own world. I think is just, and what you said, Paul, about the institution not getting punished, you know, like, we've got this trial now with Chauvin and all the cops are lining up to say, like, oh, what he did to George Floyd, no cop should ever done, which is like, I mean, yes, that's true, but it's also some level of, like, no.
That's also what happens every single time.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Because
exactly.
It's the institution saying that's just a bad apple. It has nothing to do with us, you know, it's not our fault that someone couldn't tell the difference between a taser and a gun or whatever that nonsense excuse is these days.
Yeah, it's like it's your fucking orchard. Take responsibility for it.
Yeah, I like that for the bad apples thing.
Or don't be it. They also say one bad apple spoils the whole damn bunch. So I've never really understood a bad apple as being a good explanation for why one person's just like, oh, it's like, have you read their whole saying? I don't know.
Yeah.
When you get a lemon car, you get your money back. So
yeah,
like
I'd like my tax dollars back for training these people. That'd be nice.
Yeah.
I will say though, the flip side of all this, and Will, you brought this up. I was so angry at this show because they also, on some small level, made me feel sympathy for John Walker.
Oh yeah,
because I mean he's and to make clear the kind of thing I'm talking about, it's like if anyone who's seen the Boys. I know, Paul, you stopped watching, and this is a kind of mild spoiler, but not really much of one.
I don't care about spoilers.
Yeah. Will, have you seen The Boys?
Yeah, I've watched it all.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I mean, for the general audience, I care about spoilers.
If you haven't, I don't think it's going to spoil. It's going to be a minor detail. I'm not going to go into any plot things, but like one of the things that happens over the course of the show is we realize that Homelander, who's basically like just the most awful person on the show, except the literal Nazi who later comes along, although they're close to each other, because he's very much a supremacist. He's a murderer. He's awful. And you also realize that part of why he's this emotionally broken, completely monstrous person is because he had this monstrous childhood where he got absolutely no love and affection. He was raised as a laboratory experiment instead of a child. And you have a moment of like, I hate you so much, but I also sympathize with you. Mm-hmm. And I feel some sort, like I see you as a, and when Walker was talking to that council and saying like, you know, you made me like this, you built me. To me, it made it like, this is kind of like a tragic story of his because like he did want to do good. He hated the fact that he did what he did in Afghanistan. He wanted to do better. I don't in any way think he has 100% responsibility. It's not his fault. He's a monster, but he's that person in part because of the way he's been shaped and built. And like, God damn it, you're making me have sympathy for this asshole. This is not a good thing. You make me have sympathy for this guy I really don't want to have sympathy for. I don't like that feeling.
I like it. I mean, I liked it in this episode because it felt earned to me. It felt real, you know? And when a story does that in this just like super blatantly manipulative way, not to say that there's not any manipulation here, but here it feels like a real person, you know? I mean, there's tons of people who do things similar to what he did, just maybe not as publicly, and are eaten up by them, and they did them because it's what they were trained to do, it's what they were told to do, it's what they were ordered to do. Yeah. And then they get back, and that's like how do you deal with that? I don't know, you know, but so many people have to, and it doesn't always go so well for them. And, you know, it's not like you don't still fault the person for their actions, but, you know, there is a system that built them, that basically taught them to do things a certain way. And as long as those systems persist, there are going to continually be people doing horrible things, partially because they've been trained to, and it eats them up as well, you know? So, you know, the victims of a particular, you know, murder aren't always just the victims, right? I mean, it can reverberate in so many ways. And I mean, speaking of which, like, there's always the family of the victims, which brings up kind of what I thought was a sort of interesting ethical thing that I might see differently than a lot of people. But, you know, Walker lying to Lamar's parents about who killed him, you know, and saying, yeah, it was that guy. What do you all think about that?
I think the sister knows that he lied.
Oh, okay.
Like the way she looked at him, and the camera stayed on her. Like,
yeah,
I feel like she either thinks he's lying or she sees that he has no remorse. whichever one it is, she sees something bad in him. Is really
right.
But
yeah. My read of that was that, like, she blames him for the death of her brother. But I could definitely see your reading of it as well.
I think if all we had was him lying to the family, and he didn't lie to anyone else, then, and again, and the sister doesn't see it, because I think Will, I do think that's probably a good read of the situation. I think there's a case to be made for telling them the story that will bring them the more comfort. Mm-hmm. I feel like I still probably think it's the wrong thing to do because I feel like if you can do it and they never learn the truth, then maybe it's the right thing to do if it brings comfort. I think in this day and age, the possibility of them never learning the truth is very hard to imagine. But I think there's at least a strong possibility that there's some value to it. The thing is, though, with Walker, he's not just lying to the family. He also like the government, that like his trial, they clearly think that he killed the person who had literally killed Lamar.
Right.
And other people think that. And I kind of feel like Walker he tells the family in part because it comforts them, but in part because he needs to keep his story straight, because he's lying both to himself, I think, to help justify it to himself, but also to help keep him out of more trouble, you know?
Sure.
And so I kind of feel like it's hard. I think you're right. There's a great potential question there, but the fact that he's lying to everyone else dilutes the idea that he's doing this as a kindness to me.
That's fair. That's fair. For me, it seems like a totally reasonable thing to do. I don't know. I feel like you already killed someone. That was horrible. Like, lying to some people in a way that might make them feel a little bit better. Like, I'm kind of on board with that. Like, totally against the murder. Kind of good with the lying. But I think you raise a really good point, like, about if they're going to find out later, then that's going to be kind of like a new additional pain that they have to go through. I'm a little more skeptical in terms of them necessarily finding out, because, like, it was just a bunch of people, like, in an abandoned building, and, right. You know, like, who's gonna, I don't know, are Sam and Bucky gonna come out and, like, make it publicly known that it was Carly? Like, I'm not so sure, but I could see how that could possibly happen. And that's a pretty good justification for not doing it. And, you know, he definitely is also trying to cover his own ass.
Yeah.
No doubt.
So we didn't get much, as you said, Paul, of Carly and the GRC, but we certainly get a little bit of it on both sides. And I know we had kind of a really interesting discussion last time about, like, Carly's motivations and who she kills and who she doesn't. And here she definitely is kind of going into some darker areas with what she's planning to do. We're also like, I mean, if you needed to stamp the big red villain sign on the GRC, we get that. You know, they're going to use the military to deport 20 million people. I can't think, this is like monstrous fascist territory they're entering into. But also, like, Carly's now, like, planning to kill Falcon and maybe planning to kill everyone in the GRC council. Like, what was kind of your take on that? Because I know you have a lot of strong feelings about how she's portrayed.
Yeah, so trying to decide whether I want to say this on record or not. All right.
To any FBI agents listening, please remember this is a purely hypothetical discussion about a completely hypothetical world that has no bearing in any way, shape, or form to our reality, except in all the ways that we already said that it does. Anyway, Paul, go ahead.
That was so perfectly worded. I feel like you had that ready.
It's boilerplate.
This is not the first time we've crossed this barrier.
Police have come to our door in the middle of recording the show. I've given it some thought.
In which we were talking about a hypothetical murder of the president, Lex Luthor, by Superman.
In reality, it turned out it was a complete coincidence, probably. But I love the idea that the NSA is really worried about our show, so I'm going to run with that concept.
Right. We have so many listeners. I mean, not that we don't appreciate every listener, and it's been growing, and we love that. And we're happy to hear from everybody. Okay, so if you're going to kill people for a cause like this, which I think is potentially justifiable, these are the people to kill. And I don't know exactly what their plan is. I mean, killing Falcon, I don't know. Like, I don't even understand what's going on with, like, Batroc and, like, Sharon, and that whole thing was so, like, like 30 seconds of the show practically that it's almost like they're just like, oh yeah, by the way, there's this plot, that we're going to do some big stuff in the next episode in case you're not into all the talking, which like, I'm so here for the talking.
Yeah.
But
I'm going to reserve judgment on anything that Carly is doing with that because I don't know what the hell's going on. I have no way to judgment yet.
Yeah. All right, but when the lights went out in the GRC after the one dude said the other, like, what did he say?
One world, one people.
Yeah. It's possible that I said out loud, "Yay, kill them all." And Lee was like, "What the fuck?" But they're fictional characters, and in the real world, I don't really want to do all that. But like. GRC is basically like super ice. Like,
yeah.
And like, yeah, I think ice should be abolished. I think the GRC should be abolished. And in that world, like, how are you going to go at it? Are you going to do that in some political way when they're literally going to use military force to displace 20 million people? Like, you know what? Like, there's 20 some people on I don't know how many people are on the council. They're clearly not all necessarily horrible. I mean, to some level, I'd say they're complicit, but like, the one person's like, do we really need to do a vote? I thought some of that stuff was like a bit on the nose, actually. Mm-hmm. And we don't know exactly, like, where does the GRC get its authority? Like, we don't know who the president of the US is, or like, is it still that Ellis character? Also, are we sure that there has been a black president in the United States in the MCU?
No, but I right? just really wanted them to say it.
Yeah, no, word. I mean, totally. Like, that would have been great. And so, like, the thing is, this is sort of where I feel like the show has somewhat bitten off more than it can chew in like a 6-episode series, because like the idea of trying to overthrow, like, explain and then have a fight against this international organization that's somehow got control of troops. Like, it's just so much, and there's so much we don't know about it and the details. Mm-hmm. It's just like, I kind of don't even know where to start with it, just because it's like, yeah, they're fascist villains. It's interesting that it's this thing called the GRC. It's not the UN. It's not the US. It's a fictitious organization, right? The same way Hydra, like, Steve Rogers wasn't exactly fighting the Nazis. He was fighting Hydra. Yeah. I mean, he was definitely fighting the Nazis, but there was also this fictional organization. And like, when a country gets destroyed, it's Sokovia. It's not Belgium. Right. Mm-hmm. It's not Serbia. It's so I feel like there's a little bit of kind of sidestepping.
Just a quick thing I want to jump in on with that. For that reason, the whole time Isaiah was talking, I had this fear that they were going to mention that it was like a Hydra doctor. That it was something say like it was Hydra as part of the United States. And the fact that they didn't do that, I felt was for the exact opposite reason of what you're talking about. It was the United States did this, not Hydra.
Absolutely,
the United States did this.
Yeah.
Anyway, so but go on to your main point.
Yeah, I mean, my main point is just like, I think that organization needs to not exist, and if there's a way to do it without violence, that's 100% the way to go. But if there's not, I don't know, and like, I think it's much more reasonable doing something against their headquarters during a vote for something like this than to like blow up that building with people you'd already tied up. Like, that felt like it didn't really make sense to me. But given that, this makes all the sense in the world, basically.
Yeah.
Is how I would say it. I will say sort of how I would like to see things end. Mm-hmm. Where, I mean, clearly there's gonna be some kind of big showdown between... Oh, did you watch the mid-credit scene yet?
Yeah, did you watch it?
You did. Okay, yeah. So clearly, there's gonna be two people who are like, I'm Captain America. And the government's going to be like, neither of you, Captain America. And they're going to both be like, we don't care what you think, which is fair. Only one of them will I recognize as having any reasonable claim to the title. But, and then you've got Bucky, and then you've got the Flag Smashers, and who knows who else. And there's clearly going to be some kind of a showdown, right? My hope is that, that goes how it goes, but that you get kind of a V for Vendetta style ending where it's not like doing whatever they do at the headquarters is the big thing that makes all the difference. Since we know that they're this big organization that has all of these kind of loosely affiliated members, who should be all over the place, I feel like some sort of mass act of civil disobedience is on the table and would be really powerful. And, they already have their mask, right? So, if you had, 10 million people around the world, putting on Flag Smasher masks and just being like, no, you can't come in and displace these people, I think would be maybe too much to hope for in episode 6, but it's what I want.
Yeah. Will, what about yourself? Are you on Team Kill All the GRC, or what's your stand on Carly and the GRC here? I just want to see who else is joining Paul in the criminal conspiracy that I'm not going to testify towards.
Oh man, I'm not a fan of Let's Kill 'Em All, but I see it from a story standpoint. I guess whenever I think of that scene, I keep on going back to... Okay, so my other podcast host, Steve, whenever we talk about, or whenever he talks about things you want to see on a story, I really want to see this scene happen, the first thing he always brings up is okay, but how did we get there? What's the background behind this, right? So whenever I think of the GRC raid scene, I think of Sharon and Batroc and Carly and how they're all in communication with each other to some degree, and so then I get distracted and I focus on that instead.
That's totally fair.
I want to know more about that.
There's so much going on.
Yeah, and that's what I keep on thinking about. Of just okay, so maybe my side theory of Sharon being the power broker is a thing, but because how else? I don't know. Carly, I appreciate that they showed Carly using some tech and coordinating people in this episode, but she's still so connected. She has contacts with every single character we've seen on screen, whether or not she's involved in the scene or not. So I don't know, man. I don't know. Maybe they're gonna make Contessa the power broker, but conceptually, big picture, I think the raid is going to be a great scene for a climax for everyone to show up at the same place. But do I support the idea? No, but deporting 20 million with military might, that's not good. There is not a good answer here.
Yeah.
And I'm not the one to provide what works.
Oh, come on. You're on this podcast. That means you get to decide the future of everything around the world. That's the whole point.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm... God, there's so much gray area here, and I love it. I think there's a couple things here. One, Paul, I completely agree with you, and I think that's why the differentiation of this with the bombing of the building is so important. To me, I think we want to think that, every person serving in the military, they're evil and bad and terrible. And, yes, the whole, you sign up for something, it's true, but also, people join the military because it's their only way to, get an education, or their only way to, pay their bills, or, they're, recruited by incredibly predatory recruiters when they're 16. And especially like at one point they even specifically mentioned like one of the people in the Flag Smashers thought about becoming a GRC security person because they were like, it pays well. What other option do I have? So I feel like part of why the bombing really bothers me is I'm like, I don't think those people are your enemy. Like they're wearing the uniform of your enemy, but they're not the people you hate. And so like, yeah, if you want to like the people who are saying like, yeah, let's deport 20 million people, and we know that they don't have good enough refugee facilities yet, but let's do it. Yeah, shoot them in the head. I mean, better to arrest them. Better to arrest them if we can. But, like, those are people committing, like, heinous war crimes, and I would much rather see them arrested. I would much rather see, like, justice served in some way. But if they die as part of the fight, I'm going to shed no tears because, like, even if you want to, like, I do think the mass deportations we do in this country are evil as hell and fascist, but even if you don't want to agree with me on that, like, they clearly say here that these people understand that the refugee facilities are not ready to hold this. That they're going to be, like, creating life-threatening, like, horrible conditions for 20 million people, and these folks are okay with that. Like,
yeah, people will die. Like,
yeah. And
that's for sure.
And so, yeah, like, if you can stop this from happening, yeah, do it. And like, I don't want you to kill people to do that, but if you do, like, that's you kill a few people to save a whole lot more. I don't think it's a game of numbers, but that is one reason why sometimes, like, if they have to die as part of the I don't want to see them get killed on camera as a political statement, but if, like, in the fighting that's what has to happen, I'm not going to cry tears about it.
But no one else is no one else outside the Flag Smashers seems to be organizing or fighting for those 20 million people.
Right.
Right. Like, where's the ACLU?
Yeah, and I think Paul, that's the point you're talking about. There's so much that we don't know. We keep seeing that these, like, any park that, Carly goes to is probably going to be filled with at least half the people are supporting her and have this app on their phone. Like, Torres was able to pretty easily get that app on his phone in episode 1.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is not a hard organization to infiltrate.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
But here's the other thing, and this is the one I thought part of the episode that felt a little heavy-handed. I like that during the GRC scene, you see a couple of representatives, and I noted they were from, like, I think one was Indian, and the other was from some other, like, people of color nation.
Is an airplane landing?
Yeah, I'm sorry. My mic is way too good. Okay,
it's fine. I can edit it out later.
Yeah. We'll just take a beat. Okay, I think we're good.
But yeah, but you do have a couple people on the council who are clearly against what's happening, or, like, at least raising concerns. And I did notice, I think one of them's Indian. I think they're both from countries that are primarily people of color. And you're right, Paul. Maybe the idea is supposed to be that they're complicit. Maybe the idea is, but actually, what I thought they were saying was, Carly thinks that they're all the same. And this scene felt like a kind of heavy-handed way of saying us, like, no, see, this is how Carly is too extremist, because even on the council, there are some people who are not as evil, and they do want to do good. And I felt like, okay, Marvel, if you want to give us that story, then it can't be a 5-minute story. You need to spend a whole episode with the GRC and Carly and let us see who these people are. But yeah, I think I'm glad that we're taking the fight to the leaders, and I'm glad that we're naming, mass deportation is evil and is a violation of every possible idea of human rights. So, I'm glad for that.
Me too. I think this is a good time to mention that we're at some point in the near future going to do an episode focused specifically on that theme.
Yeah, we're going to do something on the idea of borders and nationality, and we're probably going to talk a lot about this show as well as the TV show Warrior, which Paul pointed out to me, started on Cinemax, now is on HBO, has the Game of Thrones idea of how much sexuality is needed in the show, so take it or leave it on that regard.
And violence.
Like, there literally is a large part of the plot set at a brothel. I mean, it's like they watch Game of Thrones, they're like, cha-ching!
Yeah.
I'll also say the one other thought that I'm having, especially as we talk about, like, how much plot there is here that we're never going to get all resolved, with Sharon and the GRC and the power broker, and now, Elaine coming to have a major role as this countess. I don't like time travel much, But Tom Hiddleston is such an amazingly charismatic person, and Loki is such a great character that I have been really excited about the new Loki show. And I feel like at the end of this, I'm going to be like, no, don't tell me about Loki. Go back to the Power Broker. Tell me what Sharon's about. Give me more of that world, not like whatever Loki's up to. So
right.
Like WandaVision led into this in a great way. But I'm worried that at the end of this, I'm going to be like, I don't care about time travel in Loki. Like, give me more of what's happening with the GRC.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that Marvel is making a bunch of different shows that are substantially different from one another that, you know, are going to have a lot of crossover. Like, there's going to be people who love all of them, but that people who maybe don't want to watch everything Marvel are going to have kind of a pick of like, okay, what kind of show am I more interested in? Am I going to watch, like, you know, maybe 6 months from now, a year from now, right? You're like, oh, well, I'll watch this show. This is up my alley.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But at the same time, like, I like this show too much. And I mean, you know, with the caveats already mentioned, but there's just so much to explore. And it just feels like, I don't think there's a lot of shows that need to be like, have 20 episode seasons, but I do feel like this is one that has gotten to a point and has enough characters and stuff going on that, like, you definitely could do that and you wouldn't run out of stuff to say.
Yeah.
Or I feel like at least what I would want is, and granted, this is now where we're getting so, because it used to be like, yeah, you'd watch a season of a show and be like, awesome, I get more of that next year. It'll suck a little bit to wait. Now we're like, no, give us more. But it's not even like, it doesn't even have to be 20 episodes of this, but if the next show was Agent 13, you know, and it was going to be 8 episodes about Sharon and like what's happening with her.
Right.
And then, and then the next show was Hawkeye, but what Hawkeye is doing is about the GRC in some way. Like it's just kind of like stay. I love the idea of like we have this overall. I mean, this is kind of like what they did with Thanos in the MCU movies. It was like there was this overarching story, and all these different movies were in different parts of the universe, but you knew they were all going in the same direction and they were all playing off of the same events. And I just want more Marvel shows like that. You know, I have a hope that Hawkeye. Well, I don't know. Hawkeye might be going back in time to. No, it's not, because it's going to be about his daughter. So I have hopes Hawkeye will continue this part of the story too. And Loki may still be great, and I'll have fun talking about Loki. But the first episode, at least, I'd be like, time travel. I know where you should time travel to. 6 months after the blip, go there, try it.
I mean, speaking of time travel and restorative justice, like I'm like, Sam, you know about time travel. Like, you could give Isaiah like a Steve Rogers moment. Like, you could let him go back and like see the love of his life again. Like, and obviously it wouldn't be the same and fix everything, but like, I don't know. I feel like that would be like a good use of time travel that like shouldn't mess up the timeline too much. You know?
If
be like, look, you can't go out, you just chill with her at home.
If the story was that she disappeared, then they could do it.
Yeah.
I also will say, like, this. I think you're both right there completely, but I will just also say, like, after the last year, like, the comment of, like, yeah, you can just go inside, it's not a big deal, is not one I can completely agree with.
They can just go inside?
Sorry,
yeah,
you
just
said
go
that
hang out
they
inside.
can just stay. They can just stay inside for the rest of their lives. That's not a big deal. Like after this last
Oh. I don't know. I guess I experienced the last year differently than most people, but I get you. I get
true.
you.
You're a little bit more of an introvert than some of the rest of us.
I mean,
or a misanthrope, whichever word you want to choose.
Yeah, I'm debating the words, but I'm good. I'm like, yeah, whatever.
Hermit in training.
I'd like to go out sometimes, but like, you know what? It's all good.
So we've gone on quite a while already. There's just one or two quick little things I wanted to throw in. And then hear from you all. What are the last things you want to talk about? Io, when she's having... Well, first of all, like, okay, what did you think of Bucky and Zemo? Because I thought there was a great scene, and also I think I figured out what was going on there, and it made some things make a lot of sense, but I definitely had some questions throughout it. What would you all think of what we learned about Bucky and Zemo in that scene?
I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything in that scene was what was unsaid, and I think Zemo and Bucky had a full on conversation with their faces.
Yeah.
And I think they understand each other.
Yeah. To me, it was. I know we talked last time about how they let Zemo escape, and like none of them could know that. But to me, I think it was a very interesting turn for Zemo's character. That clearly he's not trying to stay escaped. Like he, very clearly was like, I need to go to this monument. And remember, he said before that he was kind of like chiding Sam and Bucky that they hadn't been to the monument. Mm-hmm. And this was kind of like, it was a way of getting them to go there, and having this last moment with Bucky of like, yeah, if this is going to happen, like, I need you to confront, like, this is what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
Did you think Bucky was actually going to... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say Zemo seemed so, like, kind of at peace in that moment.
Yeah.
And I think he was like, you're... Bucky basically being able to say, like, hey, I'm not a killer anymore, like, just because they made me one, Mm-hmm. Like, and I think Zemo's kind of acceptance first of, like, yeah, if you're gonna kill me, you're gonna kill me, and that's okay. Yeah. And then sort of acceptance of, okay, well, I guess it answered Sam's question, what about Bucky? I thought very well.
Yeah, I think that's true. Did you think Bucky was going to actually shoot him?
No.
No. I very much thought he wasn't going to, but he kept on going through the motions of about to shoot, and I was like, wait, is he? Is he?
Yeah, I think the best way I can describe it is I trusted that Bucky would never shoot Zemo. I didn't trust that the writers knew that. And like, we talked a little bit about how, like, Carly, like, would she really, like, I worried that this was going to be like, nope, Paul's right. The characters are doing dumb things they would never do. But yeah, I did think that it was, like, important. And I loved the Io and the Dora Milaje in this scene. As part of the whole, like, the internationalist thing, I was very surprised when they said they were bringing him to the raft, because I thought part of it was going to be like, we put him we let your justice system work with him. It didn't work. We're taking him back to Wakandan prisons, or maybe some worse punishment, Wakanda. And the way they were like, nope, we're still going to contribute to this, like, international system of justice, and we're still going to be a part of it, but we're going to do this ourselves. It was like, okay, that's another kind of small moment of Wakandan's internationalism here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, although the raft is kind of like Guantanamo, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I get what you're saying, but I also really don't like it. Like, I like that they weren't like, we're going to kill you, because that would totally undermine T'Challa's growth, you know, and his, like, I don't want vengeance, but justice, whatever that is. But, like, I think, the raft just shouldn't exist, probably. Yeah. But yeah, I do appreciate the sort of internationalism and the cooperation and the being like, we're gonna put him somewhere safer that is apparently internationally controlled. I'm not sure what's up with Secretary Ross anymore. It's been a minute since Civil War in universe, so like he shouldn't still be in that same position, I wouldn't think. Who knows? Maybe they repealed term limits during the blip, but like, it just all seems like so many questions.
Yeah.
But I did enjoy their interaction, and like, we're just bringing him back to jail. We're not doing something that would actually make no sense and undermine, an important character.
Mm-hmm. And such a small moment, but especially part of the conversation about Bucky's arm that we had at the beginning was also the sense of like how Wakanda feels very betrayed by, like, they not Wakanda as a whole nation can like feel one thing, but like that to clearly like Dora Milaje and maybe whoever is involved, like, they sheltered him, they took care of him, they protected him for 2 years, they gave him this arm, and then he like breaks out this person who's like, now that Claw's dead, probably the biggest, like, most hated person in Wakanda. And so I really love at the end that she kind of like, Io kind of gives Bucky a warning of like, don't mess with us again, but also calls him White Wolf. Because to me, that was a nice moment of being like, you are, the title we gave you, you still have. And it's that kind of like, if like you have a fight with someone in your family, you can either say like, you're still my brother, but I'm mad at you, or like, I'm so mad at you that you're not my brother. And this was clearly the first by calling him White Wolf. And I just thought that was a really nice moment there.
Yeah.
For sure.
So those were kind of my last little things. Do you all have any other last things you wanted to touch on?
I actually just wanted to kind of cycle back to the discussion about, very briefly,
go for it.
The Dora Milaje, I guess it was Io in that scene, right? Removing the arm, Bucky's prosthetic arm. And obviously, I think it can make people feel a certain way. And I think, I want to respect that. At the same time, like, I wish we could do that to everybody who's trying to be violent, like, if, like, in that instance, it was like, here's a way to stop someone from engaging in violence when we don't want to injure them. And, maybe we're causing some emotional harm, but we want to stop physically engaging with them, basically. And I mean, that's why I think characters who have powers that are like able to do stuff like that, would make the best superheroes in some ways. But I don't know. I'm losing coherence. Maybe strike this bit.
I see what you're saying, though. To have an off switch.
Right, yeah. Like, yeah, basically, just the idea being like, if there is a way to disarm someone, that's always preferable to causing permanent physical damage, I think.
Like, and this is why I'm really looking forward to when we get into an episode of bodily autonomy, because there's also the sense of like the difference between dropping a weapon versus like removing a body part, but also because it's like, like even in the conversation that happened at the end of last episode of where people were talking about like not Captain America, where John Walker murdered that guy. Like I made some like TikToks about it and some posts, and I wanted to say like, he killed an unarmed man.
Right.
Is a super soldier ever actually disarmed? Like, they can kill people with a punch. Like,
but so can a regular human. I mean, that's the thing. It's like nobody is ever, unless unconscious,
right?
Nobody is ever rendered,
unable to kill.
Impotent.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
But I think in the same way that like Bucky's arm is a weapon, I think you can say like a lot of a super soldier's person is a weapon, much more so than a normal person. But
yeah.
But I think putting that aside, like one of the things that I both loved and I thought was a little bit of an ethical cheat in the TV show Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is that very quickly, I think in like season 1, they basically invent stun guns. Like they invent a way to... Is it episode 1?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah. Icers.
Yeah. Like what a great way for them to be like, we are never going to confront the moral problem that using violence to stop someone from doing bad things may well lead to their death. Because we're just going to like invent this thing. And it'd be great. Like, if we can have stun guns, like, Star Wars does, like, yeah, you get into some great, like, you can end problems without doing that physical harm to them, which...
Right. Although, one thing that's always ignored when people talk about stun guns is, like, falling, you can really hurt yourself.
Yeah.
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 Right.
You could fall down, hit your head, and die. So, like, even stun guns, obviously, but obviously way less, which is why I think we should always try and use the terminology less lethal.
Yeah.
Instead of non-lethal.
Right. But. I mean, like, I think we were having conversations before about, I bring up Daredevil all the time, but, like, yes, Carly's punch, maybe Steve Rogers knows how to perfectly pull his punch, but, like, Steve Rogers punches a lot of people who fly across a room and crash into a metal wall, on, like, the ship
and then
or something.
Are fine.
Yeah. Like, that's...
Or just unconscious.
Yeah. And he did kill people in Winter Soldier. The guy that he just straight up, like, face kicked and like sent him flying into the wall of the edge of the ship, and then he snapped over backwards over the railing of the ship and then fell off, he died.
Oh yeah.
Maybe.
He died. He totally died.
I mean, to me, if nothing else, like I saw a lot of people being like, Steve Rogers would never get blood on the shield. It's like, no, if the directors of The Boys or of the movie Logan were showing that, like, Steve Rogers hits a whole bunch of people in body parts with that shield, there's gonna be blood on it. Like that's.
Well, here's the thing. Okay, I've got a bone to pick with that one.
Oh, we're gonna get into physics here. Okay.
No, we're definitely not getting into physics. I mean, we're getting into comic book physics, I guess. Okay. Like Steve Rogers, if he existed in a world directed by those people, first of all, wouldn't fucking exist in a world directed by those people. But like, would behave differently. Like here's the thing. Within the context of superhero fiction, just the rules are different. And characters behave in a way that makes sense within the context of those rules. Yeah. And that's why episode 4 was so annoying to me, because I was like, oh, now comic book violence kills people. Right. I like and partially accept Will's headcanon as like Steve's always kind of trying to control himself and has had time to train not to, not to use lethal force, right? But to still use massive force. But, and he definitely killed people in the first Avenger, right? I mean, that was just a straight up war. But like, I do think that it's like, you have to kind of accept that the character takes their actions with the understanding that like the rules of physics are what they are within that setting, even if those rules are ridiculous and don't match the real world.
Right. And I think that's a better way of saying what I'm trying to say. Because it's like with Daredevil and the hitting people with metal rods. It's not that I think that he's lying to himself. I think it's that the show is lying to the audience by telling people that there's such a possibility of violence that has no possibility of lethality.
That absolutely 100%.
And we have established that the shield does not obey the laws of physics.
Yes.
According to Peter Parker.
That is very true.
Yeah, it's one hell of a frisbee. That's certainly for sure. One other last little thing I wanted to mention. I keep saying you guys can bring stuff up, but I keep having one more thing. Although, Paul, you brought something up. So
no, I've had a couple one more things.
Yeah, so there we go. Will, it's your turn next, so think of something.
Oh,
you don't have to. We can end the show. But like, I just want to say there were two things that really stuck out to me about Isaiah's story. One, he says like the thing that got him in trouble was that he disobeyed governmental orders in order to go behind enemy lines to rescue prisoners of war.
Yeah.
That's exactly what Steve Rogers does in the first Avenger. Like, and that's not coincidental in the slightest. And I love that callback. And the other thing is the way he describes the testing that they went through, like where the people didn't know they were being tested on and it went for a long time. Like, he's 100% talking about something that's equivalent to the testing of the Tuskegee Airmen that happened. Like the black group of pilots where the exact same thing happened. And I really like those two. Like, one's a call out to the MCU world, one's a call out to our real world, but two just like wonderful ways of anchoring Isaiah's story in like very real things. One very horrific, and one like showing how heroic he is.
Yeah, I have nothing to add, but I completely agree.
Yeah.
All right, Will, any last stuff from you?
No. It was. Yeah, I get the only other thing I can add is just there's really not much you can read into the reveal of Contessa Valentina de Fontaine. She's like never in the comics. She got introduced years ago. I think it's like 60 years ago. And she's basically kind of the SHIELD love interest of Nick Fury Sr., not black Nick Fury, but the white Nick Fury. And she's a spy, and she's basically on par with like Dum Dum Dugan in the comics. And then she's like never used, and she shows up twice in the comics in the last like 20, 30 years.
Okay.
And so like it's an established character, and it's great to see, and I love when they pull in more famous actors to play more named characters in the MCU. But like she's a blank slate; they could do whatever they want with her.
Right.
That honestly makes me really happy because
me too.
I liked WandaVision a lot, and I really loved getting to be a part of it. I was on all the podcasts. But I find there's something frustrating. Like, I want to just experience the show as it is on screen. And I hate when, like, I'm halfway through watching a character's story, but because I know all the stuff from, like, the comic books, because other people are talking about it, or because I know it or whatever, like, now I have this, like, okay, I think I know how this character is supposed to go. And I was going to be, like, this week really trying hard not to, like, read any of the posts about her. So I kind of love knowing that there's not a, like, this is what her story is supposed to be.
Nah,
and so expect that. Like, nope, blank slate. That's a perfect character to bring in then, I think.
So it sounds like you're saying she could be Mephisto.
Sure.
I think you mean Count Fisto. Count Testo.
Count Fisto.
All right. I think we have hit the point of punch drunkenness where we're going to wrap up this show. So you both create a lot. I want our listeners to get to find the stuff you're doing. Will, how can people find more of your stuff?
I'm on another podcast with my buddy Steve called Hype is My Superpower. We talk about the Marvel comics that we've read in the past week. And you can find us on Instagram. I think we are going to have the Twitter at some point. You can find us on Facebook, where you can throw in some extra listener questions for us to address. And find our podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Awesome. I want to give you one of my highest endorsements, something that I think we try for a lot on some of the podcasts I do, but don't always succeed in. I think when you're talking about material that's a little more obscure, in terms of like it's not on the huge screen, for me, as someone like who doesn't read comic books, a lot of those podcasts just go over my head. You all make it like I've listened to probably 4 of your episodes by now, never having read the comic books you're talking about, and I was able to fully follow the discussions you guys are having. And so
that's
I really
awesome
want
to hear.
Give that as a shout out, because that's something we try to do. I think when mostly anything that Paul recommends is generally going to be more obscure. Although also I've pulled in like the Magic the Gathering storyline and stuff like that. I think sometimes we do a good job of making it clear. Sometimes we don't. But yeah, I think it's a great podcast to listen to. Definitely, folks should check it out. Paul, what about yourself? Where can they find your Tristies of Rebellion?
Yes. I haven't been doing a lot of political writings, but I stream a lot of chess on twitch.tv/ZenMadman, which I guess is a game where you're trying to overthrow the opposing monarch. So yeah, there's
there you go.
You can look at it in a certain way, and poker and whatnot else. So Twitch ZenMadman. Also, I have a Twitter. I don't tweet that much. I mostly just retweet when Matthew tweets about it. And technically, I have a TikTok, but I haven't put anything on it. Yep. But I might put some odes to rebellion on there at some point.
I like that idea. Yeah, and so, folks, as you heard, we spent probably a good 15-20 minutes at the start of this episode based on listener feedback. We love listener feedback. It's a great way to let us know what you think. Give us your input. Tell us about the issues that we're missing. Tell us things that you agree with, don't agree with. Would love to hear from you. The Ethical Panda is the name that I kind of do all my podcasting under, because it's this podcast and a few of the others that I do. So you can find us on Facebook or Twitter by searching for The Ethical Panda. You can also look for us you can also email us at theethicalpanda@gmail.com. I also now have a Twitter account where I'm talking a lot about superhero issues and stuff like that. I'm also talking some about religion and my own ADHD, and I just put out something completely trolling the hell out of religious conservatives that I'm having a lot of fun with. People are coming into my comments telling me that I'm a heretic, and I just say, like, no, it's okay, brother. I hope you find the God of love that I do actually believe in. But it's just,
TikTok,
it's just pissing them off. Yeah, so TikTok, The Ethical Panda, check that out. And the last thing I'll say is, if you're, got a few bucks and you really like this podcast, you want to support it, it'd be great if you could head over to Patreon. Again, find us on The Ethical Panda and sign up to be one of our patrons. You get some great advantages. You get ad-free content, because you're already paying for it, and that way you don't have to hear whatever advertisements are getting thrown in. You can get access to being like, we'll definitely mention you on the podcast. There's different merch and things like that. There's an outtakes reel. Paul and I say some very ridiculous things from time to time that will get us even more on the FBI watch list. So definitely check that out if you can. And then, of course, we're part of a whole larger network of podcasts that you can find on strandedpanda.com. There you'll find podcasts about the MCU, DC, Star Wars, Star Trek, all sorts of great things. The newest podcast is Animation Deliberation. One of our listeners I know wrote in and asked me if we're ever going to cover this new show, Incredibles, that's come out. I haven't seen it yet, and I want to.
Invincible.
But I'd say Invincibles, I'm sorry. Yeah, Incredibles is an animated movie about superheroes already. But Invincible, they're already covering it on Animation Deliberation. So definitely check out their stuff. And we're going to do some joint episodes between them and my other podcast, Star Wars Universe Podcast, about the Bad Batch, that animated show when that goes live. So check out all the great things on Stranded Panda. The MCU cast is doing great stuff about this same show, going into much more detail about just what they love about the show, not the ethical, although they're also covering the ethical content quite a lot because you can't really talk about the show without ethical content. So check all that out. If you're up for it, please head over to Patreon, throw us a few bucks, and whatever you do, have a nice day.